is being recorded and being conducted in compliance with state and county health orders, and is being shown on YouTube and live streamed from the City of Hayward website. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. Let the record reflect that all members of the committee, Council members Lamnin, Wahab, and myself, Mayor Halliday, are all present. Oh, are there any, let's see. So I'll open public comments. I do see we have some attendees. If there's anyone who would like to make a comment, please raise your hand. Seeing no one raising their hands, we'll close public comments on items not otherwise on the agenda. And we'll move to item number 1, which is approval of the minutes of the November 18th meeting. Do any
second?
Any objections? All in favor? Aye. Raise your hand. Yeah. Okay. The minutes are unanimously approved. We'll now move on to item number 2, which is a discussion of the next steps on community safety review and proposal for spring 2021 policy innovation workshop. And so we'll start with a staff report. Is that going to be from the city manager or from the finance director?
City manager. Thank you, Mayor.
Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Mayor and Council members Lamnin and Wahab. We're bringing this report forward to the Budget and Finance Committee. I think the council has had a number of discussions around community safety. A lot of ideas have been circulating, including obviously you received a supplemental memo as an attachment to this agenda item, and also a supplemental memo from Councilmember Wahab. And, as staff, we were trying to figure out a process and a structure to really help vet those ideas and help to coalesce them around some proposals that the council could then fund, or changes that could be made for next year's budget. And so the last council meeting, some council members at the end had mentioned wanting to kind of look at maybe using the lean innovation process. Is there a format for that in order to further vet some of the ideas that have been surfaced in a way that could really coalesce them into some concrete action steps and pilot programs that the city council could consider funding for next budget year. So the staff report really outlines what would be sort of a 7-week process to take a lot of the ideas that have already been surfaced, work with stakeholders, work with technical experts, sort of identify, do these proposals even work? What are the technical constraints? What are some of the issues and challenges? How would we need to form it as a pilot program that could come forward as a recommendation? And so that's really the goal of the workshop series, is to have small groups that are further vetting these concepts and ideas and trying to coalesce around maybe 1 to 3 pilot programs or changes to the budget that could be made for next fiscal year. In the, there's been a lot of dialogue around a participatory budget committee, advisory groups, advisory committees, different structures thrown out, I think, to simplify things and really to help streamline the process and to move things forward quickly to council, which I think is what is everyone's goal. What we are proposing and what I'm proposing is that we simply use the Budget and Finance Committee as the body that could serve as an advisory touch point for the workshop group that is working on these issues. The committee has already asked for in-depth review of the police department budget. So we were going to suggest that we might want to add some additional committee meetings in the next few months to be able to accomplish those goals, and to also have this group, because it is a Brown Act governed committee and it is a subcommittee of the council. I think we just thought this was the simplest way to help move move to action steps. And so using the Budget and Finance Committee to do some of the vetting, and then having the Budget and Finance Committee then make recommendations to the full council later this spring that could be incorporated into the budget process. I do have some staff on the call, Mary Thomas in particular, and some other staff members who can answer technical questions about how the workshop would work, what the process is, and, you know, happy to sort of talk through that, answer questions about that. But I just wanted to provide sort of a high level overview. And then simultaneously, the police chief is going to be sort of reconvening and the community advisory panel with the conversation that we've talked about, like what is its role, how does it want to evolve, what will it be looking at sort of separate from this process. And so I think that conversation will be starting over the next sort of simultaneous with this process. So those are just some outlines, and really just want to, you know, I want to also just reiterate that the memo from Council Members Lamnin and Mendel and Councilmember-elect Andrews, who's now Councilmember Andrews, and then the memo from Councilmember Wahab, those are all ideas surfaced in those memos that can be vetted as part of this workshop and as part of this process. And that's the whole intent. I think one of the challenges is, I think the council being mindful that you tell us what the end goal you want to get to is, which is what I think I've heard, which is different responses to mental health calls and a different type of response to certain types of calls that come into the 911 center. And then it's really staff's job to come up with what technically works and what are some proposals that we can bring back for council discussion. So I think we can absolutely incorporate those ideas for vetting in this process. I think there's some really great suggestions and thoughts in there that we can further explore, but we need to spend some time looking at what are the technical requirements for some of the things that have been thrown out as ideas, and what are the unintended consequences, what are some of the things that, you know, we aren't aware of yet because we haven't taken a deeper dive into those topics. So I'm going to stop there. I think really this is to get some feedback from the committee members on this proposal and this approach, and just to answer any questions you might have about it.
Okay, so who would like to start on this one? Councilmember Wahab? You gave us some reading material yourself. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sorry. So a couple things. Number one, I'll be honest, from the last meeting to this meeting, I was expecting somewhat of an overview on the budget itself. Primarily just because that was part of the agenda items to be discussed. You know, I think that's what we had. It's in the minutes. So I was just assuming, since I'm sure that Director Clausen is well aware that, you know, people have to kind of turn in some budget proposals for the next fiscal year. It starts well ahead of time, if you will, than just in like March or May or something like that. So I was expecting to see some rough numbers. If not today, I do want to see it hopefully at the next meeting, specifically about the police department's budget, right? A deep dive. That, as you know, City Manager, you stated that in just your presentation right now, but also we just need to see transparency, right? And I want to be very clear, at least from my intent. I stated it in the letter, and I'm going to state it here too. I am not looking to affect anybody's jobs, if you will, right? So their salaries, their pensions, things like that. That is not my intent, right? I think that my interest definitely is, as I stated in the letter, is to move and make sure that all mental health homeless calls, one of the priority concerns of our community, and often something we see in the media that kind of has a negative reaction or a response to, be moved from police and moved to fire. That is definitely number one. And I think that there is some and Councilmember Lamnin can talk to her letter a little bit more in depth. I think that is a big concern. Obviously, I know I've had multiple conversations that I know I've kept our city manager abreast of as I've had the conversations. Our call center, I have had very transparent conversations with our call center staff, our police staff, and our fire staff, if you will, our unions. And I do believe that in the previous presentation that the police department provided, they went over some of the types of calls, but not exactly, right? And I know that I'm very big on data, so the types of calls, the volume of calls, the priority of calls, how it's responded to. And our call center, as well as our PD, in ride-alongs have actually stated that sometimes when a person calls the dispatch center, they may be calling for one thing, and when people arrive to the scene, it's a completely different issue. And I completely understand because, maybe the people that are calling don't have the full story. Maybe they're affected differently, maybe a wide variety of different things. So I would like a little transparency on the use cases of the calls that our call staff get. I also will say that the proposal I made in regards to having our call center, homeless and mental health calls all be managed by fire is something that I've talked to in depth and in length with a wide variety of community members as well as internal organizations. The reason why this is incredibly important, and I do believe that there is consensus amongst the groups, is because of the fact that it is very obvious what we need to do. And I think even the community groups, and they may have some more additional items that they want to mention, but I do believe that the clear concept is that we want to transition certain tasks. And our internal survey from PD also stated that they do not want to handle mental health and homeless calls. And we are funding fire if we do this, in the sense that public safety is also something they take care of. They currently literally walk train tracks, provide testing for homeless individuals. They are more than capable of handling this type of work, as well as the fact that they are paramedics first. So when we call the police, I know I've called the 911 and said, my father's not doing well. He just had a kidney transplant, and 3 firefighters actually came, and they're paramedics, right? The reason why I care about 911, and I know I've talked to our call center that they can transition and send the calls over to fire to handle and respond to, because they currently do that with a wide variety of calls, as well as maintenance, as well as other services. 911, as a person who has a father who comes from an immigrant background, speaks English, had a business and so forth, I asked him about 311. I asked him about 211. He had no concept of what this is. So he said, why not just 911? Everyone knows it. And we can have 1 or 2 calls transitioned or questions asked before transition of a call happens. My concern is with the budget, we would have to spend a great deal of time in ensuring that education is provided to the public as to what is 311, in multiple different languages and so many other things. I've also been reluctant because of the response around 311 as well. So I think that it needs to be done in a very wise way. And I personally think that being able to kind of cut this particular piece out of PD and put it in fire and make the call center a center for excellence and provide 24/7 support to our residents is exactly what we need to do to increase efficiency. So that's the gist of it.
Okay, thank you. And I think we probably both, Councilmember Lamnon and I'm sure have read the proposal because it was part of our budget packets. And so thank you for your ideas. I think these are, there have been a variety of ideas expressed on this. And I think that's why the proposal that's been made by the city manager to develop more in-depth look through use of community, which is what I think what was sort of implied in the survey, that now how you put together community, that's of course the devil's always in the details of that. But I do think that there's been an attempt, not that I don't have a few comments to make myself about this, about the project, about the proposal, but I just want to say that what you're offering here is an idea that is that has its positive and negative aspects, or, there are a lot of questions, but it's not so different from what everybody has been saying about what we need to do. And that is figure out how we have a different approach to certain kinds of calls. That's not an easy thing to define. So I just wanted to respond to you there that, I do thank you for your ideas, and I'm sure that they, can be a part of the discussion. I'll move on to, I'm not going to go into what, my comments yet. I'll go to Councilmember Lamnon next.
Thank you. So would like a little bit more detail. I'm not entirely, I'm familiar that we have a lean innovation process, but never having been in that process, because on the other side of the table, can you give us just sort of a brief overview of what does this look like, and how does it create really an actionable step? Because as I think was said, there's definite fatigue, and people are ready for, okay, could you do something? And I get that this is a process to get us to do something, and yet it's still a process. So help me understand how this is comes out with actionable stuff.
Sure. And I'm going to ask Mary Thomas to lay that out in a little more detail. We've now been using this process internally for close to 6 years. So we have a lot of employees who are trained in the methodology. Oops, sorry about that. My light went out. We have a lot of employees who are trained in the methodology, and it is a way to vet. It's typically used to vet pilot programs and to come up with suggestions based on deep empathy work with people who are most impacted, both employees who are implementing the services, and then also stakeholders who might be impacted by the services, and also people who end users. And so I'll let Mary jump in and just share some more kind of like, here's the steps in the process and how it works. And hopefully that'll provide some clarity. I'm going to fix my mic. I apologize.
Yeah, so typically the lean innovation process would start with, as Kelly just said, empathy work, which is kind of a buzzword, but basically that just means listening to your customers or community members and really trying to understand what their in lean innovations it's pain points, but what their major issues are in their in the experience. And so we've already done a lot of that listening. We don't want to hold up the process more to do more of that. And so the homework for the attendees would be to read through all the interviews that were done, read through any council memos, any letters that have been sent, to understand kind of where the community has been talking about things. And then obviously try and select a diverse group of folks that have had different experiences. And then the next step is to map out kind of what are the most salient or most intense problem areas, or areas that people really want to see addressed. So one of them that we keep hearing over and over again is there's concerns about the way that we're responding to mental health calls. So that would be sort of mapped out. We map those out, you kind of choose the top ones. There would be 4 different groups in this proposal that then work on 4 different problem areas, or if there's really like one major problem area, then maybe more than one group works on it. And then they would have some time to brainstorm some solutions, just to throw everything at the board. Any solutions that they want, of course, if they've already read the memos from everyone, they would have those in mind. And then they're given 2 weeks in this proposal. This is not the model, but in this proposal, they're given 2 weeks to kind of vet for feasibility. And so that means calling other cities to say like, hey, we heard you tried this. Did this work for you? What were concerns that you have? It means interviewing staff to say, have you tried something like this before? How would this work structurally? And so taking 2 weeks, what we would do is we would pull together a long list of subject matter experts that would be on call, that can try and do some of the homework for the community members. We also have both of our public policy fellows available for research, and some other folks available for research. So that would be 2 weeks. They would come back and kind of say, okay, these solutions seem the most feasible, and then have an additional 3 weeks to kind of do a really minimal, so the lean innovation method is you develop a minimal viable product. And so kind of, okay, let's say let's do like a little test. So we've developed this call center concept. let's actually like run through the steps, like do a tabletop exercise and see, could we pull it off, and see kind of how much do we think it would cost. And so at the end of the 7 weeks, you have, it's not like a super in-depth policy analysis, but you have gone through the steps of saying, here's a list of policy solutions that address this problem, that we think are feasible, and we think this is how much they might cost to do a pilot, and then would bring those back to this group. So that's kind of, those are kind of the steps. And the goal is to have, for each of the team, to try and have some staff from PD, some staff from from City Hall, other city organizations that might deal with homelessness or fire, for example, and then have community members on those teams.
Okay. And that, no, that's really helpful. Thank you. It's been a while since we've talked about it, so I appreciate the refresher on the steps and the transparency about that as well. And some of that sort of expert conversations could also be with the community as well, of like, if we had a 311 system, is that something you would use? Is it, I mean,
it could also be with service providers as well.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
who are the people that we might need to partner with to do these solutions? What works, what doesn't work? How would we do it? What would the steps look like? So I think there's multiple layers of conversation with different community stakeholders.
And
Great.
we have had, there are some groups that were unable to host community conversations just because of timing, like Glad Tidings, but have said, they want to keep being involved. So they might be a good sort of test group if we have these experiments where we want to ask a group of people how it might work for them. So yeah, I think staff would do that pre-work to get that set up so that these groups could hit the ground running.
Okay, I appreciate that. And yeah, I appreciate the short time frame, because obviously we do want to be able to incorporate this into the budget and therefore actually have that thing happen, whatever it may be, or those things, hopefully more than one. So overall, I think it's a good approach. It's an infrastructure that we know. Yeah, my energy and the energy I'm sort of feeling from the community and various stakeholders group is get going. And so if this is a way to get us there, I'm willing to go with that. And it feels like there's different ways for people to engage with it. I appreciate that the groups that did the community conversations are still looped into this. And then is there, identifying the topics, those 4 areas, because we know that 311 was the most requested thing from the community survey. So it's likely that's one of them. But how will people know what those other topics are?
That would be in the first workshop, would be to really map out what are all the different problems. And so the problems that we're trying to address. So we wouldn't just say we want to do 311. Yes, I think it'll definitely be studied, but you start with the problem. So what problem are we trying to address in that case? Is trying to address, like, what's the communication system to refer non-police responses to certain calls, and then you can look at 311s as a solution. You could look at having a different type of communication center, as Wahab was talking about. Like, you could look at various different ways to address that problem.
And I would just throw in, one of the sort of underlying principles of the lean innovation process is to fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And so it's to engage curiosity in coming up with new ideas and different ideas. And so really, I love that sort of framing of fall in love with the problem, like what is it that we're trying to solve, and not falling in love with the solution.
I got you. Don't assume we know what the solution is at the outset. Okay, is that, and I'll try and wrap up soon. I appreciate this conversation, and it brings to mind that, one of the things we hear often from the community is frustration, fear, anger, etc., and many other emotions about, for instance, officer involved shootings, and realizing that in each of those incidences, it wasn't a mental health call that came in. And so this idea of having sort of different outcomes at the end of that, if what we're talking about is this different outcomes, then we don't know. Maybe it's some training solutions, maybe it's some other things, that sort of shift that equation. And so I think there's merit to what you're saying is kind of my point, but okay. So yes, I'm fine with the approach. I think there may need to be some parallel process, and I'm fine with this being the committee that does that, about some things that maybe are really policies that are kind of off the shelf, we're ready to go with, things that, you know, whether or not we move the dispatch center to a different department or or its own department in the, you know, whatever. It's something that has been brought up. That may need to be tested in the lean innovation, or it may just be a policy decision. Things about, you know, weapons purchasing and things like that. Again, maybe policy decisions that need more of a yes, no. Some I understand we really need to understand the implications of, et cetera. And so I don't want us to not do one because we're doing the other, if that makes sense. Okay, great.
I think that was the goal of maybe having additional committee meetings if the committee members do that. So it gives you guys that forum to bring forward those issues and saying, hey, here's this other thing that we don't necessarily think needs a whole lean innovation process. We'd really like to evaluate it further. So that was the goal of having the Budget and Finance Committee really be the sort of advisory group that is interfacing with both the lean innovation sort of leadership team, but then also with staff from PD and finance in a more robust way over the next few months.
Great. Yeah. So I am on board with more meetings if need be as well.
Well, and I thought maybe at the end of the schedule, that could be a good discussion. What are people feeling like they want to have happen around?
Perfect. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. You know, I appreciate what went into this. And, you know, I have to admit, I think I've said this before, that when I started hearing about lean innovation and when we still were working in our city hall headquarters, I would go into a conference room and see a zillion Post-it notes, or, you know, up on a board, or, you know, in like nicely organized groups and colors. And, and I could tell a lot of work went into that, but, and in a little, on the other hand, my eyes were raised a little like, well, you know, really are we getting anything done here? I think that we saw how training and having staff work together in this approach, I truly believed that work helped us through this past year when we did have to very quickly reinvent a lot of wheels, and, you know, and you know, bring up a whole bunch of new programs and services that we had to do right away. And our staff did an amazing job of putting a number of things together like that. So I think that I'm becoming a fan of, because this is very complex. Everybody has ideas, and a lot of the ideas are shared, you know, but everybody has their own sort of unique approach. We can't work that way. We can't get to an answer when everybody has their own little, you know, somebody has to get together and in an intense way work through all of this and come up with something concrete. I love the idea of pilot programs, because if we totally change how we're doing and it's a disaster, that could be really bad, especially if we have a disaster, which, as we all know, is always a possibility. And sometimes they can come in multiples, as we've seen. So I like the idea of pilot projects of trying to see, okay, what works best. It isn't something that we have to solve overnight. We have a response to calls. I guess I'll just go through some notes I made about the actual you know, process as it was outlined. I always have concerns about the quick timeline, but here I'm glad that we're compressing the timeline to fit into our budget process, to get money allocated, to try some of the ideas that come out of this. We need to do that. But I do still have some concerns about the quick application process and the selection process, which wasn't real clearly outlined, especially the selection process for community members. it seemed to come from staff and then here. And in thinking about that and thinking about another idea that's come about the participatory budgeting aspect, that says the Community Services Commission should do it. And of course, they already have a lot of work on their plate on an annual basis. But there are other committees that really could be involved in this in ways. And my suggestion would be that we perhaps look at, and especially when we're asking people to commit to work, we want people who are doing that already and, have shown a seriousness about, fulfilling their responsibility as commissioners or committee members. So maybe not all, but I think we could look to our current committee structure and get representatives from, if not all of them, a lot, certainly the Community Services Commission would be one. The Chiefs Advisory Committee or panel would be another one. I honestly, possibly personnel could, I'm not as familiar with the Personnel Commission as others, as it's one of the few I haven't actually served on. Possibly, the library. I mean, we really should look at that, like maybe of sampling from all these committees of people we know are responsible, are really going to commit to the work. And then, there could be some from other aspects of our community too. I can't, I'm not going to go into all that, but thinking about that, we could reduce the initial pool by looking at it that way and getting either volunteers or people who are selected by the commission or the committee itself to be part of this. So that would be one suggestion I have, because and we've used another method of having each council member appoint some people, but
I think
about how it is currently stated that we need something a little bit more.
I want to just, sorry to interrupt you, Mayor, but I just want to also, this is going to be a lot of time commitment in a very short period. So we want to make sure that people are self-selecting at some level into the process. I think we'll obviously outreach to all of those groups for people who are interested in being a part of it, but it's different than just serving on like a monthly committee meeting. This is going to be some very intensive work, and we're an expectation that people are going to do the work and show up and not just expect to be like, advising on something. This is a hands-on, you're going to get into interviews, you're going to be working on developing solutions, so I just want to,
which is why it concerns me that it's a very short timeline, because I know it took us quite a while to go through appointing the Chiefs Advisory Panel is something that's sort of like that. And we wanted that kind of commitment, and it took a while. So I'm just a little concerned about how, I'm just expressing that now from just reading through the proposal. I'm very supportive of the proposal, but let's see, I think, obviously we need to get started right away. So you're looking to this committee to say, yes, go ahead and do it without bringing this to council. That's my understanding here.
Yes. I mean, frankly, I didn't want to hold up additional time. And I feel like if the committee is supportive of it, I have talked through it with several other council members who seem to support. I think the big thing is like people just want to get to an action item. Like we need to get to some recommendations. And so I'm trying to figure out the most expeditious way to do that. And this felt like, kind of after just sort of sitting with the conversations the council has had at the last couple meetings, really reframing, like really the council is setting your end goal. What do you want to accomplish? And then staff should be doing that technical work to bring forward solutions to you, and obviously hearing input from all of you along the way. So it's more, frankly, I could have just had staff start working on this, but I wanted to get some input and feedback from the committee because it is such a sensitive topic, and so it's not necessarily getting approval per se, because I think it would have been within my purview to have this kind of staff-led process anyway. But because of the sensitivity around the topics, I wanted to just be very transparent about what we're doing next, so that people know we're not just sitting around doing nothing. We are actually trying to get to some action items and solutions.
So I think that whatever comes out of this committee today, and I'm hoping it says go forward with this plan, keeping in mind some of the comments that have been made, that will be followed up pretty quickly by a memo to council, maybe with the staff report for this attached, in case everybody doesn't read the budget, who's not on the budget committee doesn't read the full packet, and then maybe your own comments about what transpired here and what the going forward is. So let's see. As far as the report back too, I think having members from some of the key commissions and committees like community services and chief advisory panel would bring them into the process by having people on their committees able to report back along with staff on the progress, and in addition to this committee, the budget committee. I'm wondering, well, I guess the budget for the pilot programs would come out of this process, and then you would have to come up with the numbers and we would have to vote on it as part of the budget. As both of my colleagues on the council have said, mental health is very key here. We all know that a lot of the problems that come from encounters between police and in certain types of calls involve one or both of two things: mental health and improper drug use, excessive drug use, or whatever. And they kind of go together, I think. But that's I don't know, where was I going with that? Oh, well, all right. This is this is where I was going. And in connection with budget, mental health services are provided by the County of Alameda, and that is our roadblock. That is a huge roadblock for us. We can have, and in response to Councilmember Wahab's proposal, I mean, I would have to ask, what kind of training do firefighters get on mental health? Because that's more a physical health thing. And I do think there has already been a lot of discussion about how fire probably should be going along on more calls that police go on in some of these circumstances. I think we saw an incident this summer where it would have been helpful to have the paramedics or the EMT on there when this was going down. And I know it does happen where they send teams of both, but this is a huge topic, and any solution for is going to have to involve partnerships, and the key partnership is the county and their mental health services, which I'm not sure where that they even are right now. The whole health system in Alameda County has been disrupted a little bit in the last few months. I mean, first of all, burdened, but also the board was fired. The supervisors are having their own discussions about all of this, and I don't know how long that's going to go on. So those are some roadblocks I see to us really being able to resolve this particular issue. I do think some other topics should be discussed, and the one that was mentioned in the in the staff report is that I forgot how you put the community. Wait a minute, let me get it up there.
Trust and engagement component.
That, yes, thank you. I can't manipulate my iPad right now for some reason. Anyway, yeah, that came up a lot in the survey. We want more, basically, community and neighborhood policing. And so I think that should be a focus of at least one of the groups. And, maybe you actually divide that, you have those two major topics, and that one is divided into two things. Like, I don't know. I'm not going to try to do that right now, but you could have the groups working on maybe slightly different aspects of each of those two topics. I think that would be a good way to go. And then, well, we had this other letter from the three, Councilmember Lamden, you were one of them, council members. And I just wonder how that fits into this process, or if it does, but it could be a basis for one of the groups to, to go from, that is looking at the whole, what 311 or call system, or how do we do that? And finally, you were right, Councilmember Wahab, that if we go with something like 311, that was my statement too, is community education will be very important because you want people, but we are always going to have people calling the wrong number. And now that other number is 293-7000, which not everybody has memorized, but I have after, many years, like decades, but not everybody has, but a lot of people use it. And so, education of how people even know, and maybe it is best to have one intake that then immediately gets recognized and farmed out to the right place. But it's not going to be an easy thing to do when we know, and we all have to keep in mind that the cost of not getting this right could be tremendous.
100%. Mayor,
Yeah.
if I can address some of the questions you directed, and number one, I'm not necessarily opposed to 311 as a concept to study, as well as what I would like as for 911, just to be as the call center individuals have stated that they can ask one or two more questions to route it appropriately for mental health or homeless calls. As far as training from fire, I just want to very much highlight my experience thus far. I think you guys all know that within my first month of me being on council, I did ask for more mental health and de-escalation training for both fire and police. And within that year, our chief of fire actually put it in his goals that we accepted in the budget as more mental health training and de-escalation training, to also address the fact that our firefighters are actually having to go to paramedic school before they even get a job as a firefighter with us. And they deal with behavioral health consistently. Paramedic school not only has in-depth training, but they also have their yearly trainings as well.
So,
So as much as
I'm sorry, can I have a point of order?
Yes.
So I think our agenda item is the debating of the proposal as opposed to the different
It is, and I did
as opposed to the different approaches. I think it's helpful to have that information, but I'm not sure if right now is the time to have that debate.
Okay, so let me be clear. So I do believe firefighters are educated around this, and we can obviously increase training. And I agree with you, Mayor, about some other stuff.
I mean, police officers do get do get this training as well. Is it enough? And do we need real mental health, focused, trained people?
Yeah. So the one thing I do want to say is that in regards to our proposal around the individuals serving on this committee, Mayor, I also agree with you, and I think that majority of council, because we do want action. The CSC, the reason why I included the letter that the CSC wrote is because roughly about 7 of the CSC members wrote this. And I do think that they are interested, and I would prefer that we just go with members that want to volunteer from the CSC, not necessarily the other groups, because they're not familiar with the participatory budget piece, whereas the CSC members make this regularly. We had roughly 7 people write this letter, and I think that they would participate. I would also like to highlight, I would like Black representation in one of the 3 members that you guys end up selecting. And I definitely want the timeline. I know that, somebody asked me, when do you think the timeline of budget's gonna happen? I said, usually, I know our group tends to see it roughly in March as like a first concept, our budget committee, as to the whole budget for the year. So I know we have a very short timeline. I would also prefer that the dates that is up for meetings be announced well ahead of time. I think the chief advisory panel